YouTube. Think we're going, we're recording. You can pay attention, you want to pay attention. So the biggest, I felt a little bit bad last week with this set of debugging because it felt like there were some things that we should have talked about first. We should have talked about lists. We should have talked about dicts. And just kind of fell into your lap. But again, I'm going through the course for the first time, so just kind of roll with the punches. But before we jump into lists and dicts, let's just take a step back, even beyond that. I'm going to open up a shell here in VS Code. Is this big enough, or do we need to zoom in a little bit? A little bit. Zoom in a little bit. Okay. Oh yeah, that's great. All right. So, what are data types we've talked about? Data types. String, integer. Okay, string, integer, right? So, well, I've got a variable. I'm assigning it a value. The value has a data type, right? So I say name equals Bob. The value of name is the string Bob, right? And we talked about methods for strings, right? It's not like we're masters of strings. We've kind of looked at the library and thought, okay, there's some things we can do with strings. And then we've done a lot of stuff with integers. So a lot of times when we take input, we actually want a number. So we'll turn a string into an integer. So we've done things like int, like num equals int input. How old are you? Question. How old are you? 5. Okay, and so then if I type num, I can see it's 5. And integers are things that I can do stuff with. We've done basic operations, adding, subtracting. In the reading, you learned about some cool operations, modulo, 5% of 2. What does that mean? Anybody remember? I don't like division, but they're really wrinkle to it. Well, let's look at the answer and see if you can figure it out. 5% 2 is 1. 9% 4 is 1. Remainder, basically. Called the modulo operator. And so what I'm doing is I'm dividing, I'm getting rid of all the complete sets of 4s, and I'm saying how much is left over. So 9 divided by 4 would give me 2 with the remainder of 1. The 1 is what I care about. Right? So often this can be useful in computer science. One way that it's useful is it gives us an actual operation to ask about divisibility. So if I want to know if something's divisible by 2, I don't have to write a complicated code. I can just say 50 modulo 2, and if the answer is 0, that shows that it's divisible by 2, or any number, right? Okay. So strings, integers, cool. Lists begin a step into values that can be more complicated than just a single item. And so a list is indicated with square brackets. A lot of languages follow that notation. And then it can consist of whatever I want. I can put a bunch of strings in here. I can put a bunch of integers in here. I could put a bunch of variables that have values that go in here, right? Let me just do a quick list of numbers. Okay, so here's the list. The list's length is how much? 3. And there's an implicit indexing with lists, which is that the first item in the list is item 0. And so if I ask for Ben's list bracket 0, I'm saying, give me the first element in this list, and it will give me that value, whatever it is. Let's look at some places where this showed up in our work last week.
So if you did like Ben's list 1, it would be 3.
Very good. Okay. Ben's list 1, value 3. Indexing in lists starts from 0, 0, 1, 2, and various languages allow you to use negative values or go farther. It's all kinds of crazy stuff, depending on the language. In the grading activity, here is where the list showed up. The person was asked 3 input questions. We turned them into integers. You should have it. And then we set up a list that basically collected the grades into one place. So at the end of this, grades would be a list of integers, because that's what I asked for. Assuming the person gave me the right input. They typed a bunch of gobbledygook, it might break the program, right? But if they put in numbers, then I would get the integer values, and that would be my list. So quick hop over to Python list methods before we jump into Dicts. Python uses the word list, not array. Other languages use array. So what does append do? Okay, let's do it. Here we go. Add to Ben's list. All right. I need to add the number 10 to my list. How do you think I'm going to do it?
Length,
Yeah.
Ben's list.
We need Ben's list. That's the thing I'm going to do the method on. So Ben's list, we'll call the receiver dot. What's the name of the method? I'm adding something to the end of the list. Append. Okay, so Ben's list dot append, and then I'm adding the number 10 to the list. Inside the parentheses, put the number 10. All right, now let's see if it worked. We look at Ben's list again. Hello. Okay, so this is a destructive method. Ben's list has changed. It went from 236 down to 23610. Right? Yeah.
So I know this isn't like completely related, but like, let's say in my milestone, like you have to pick up something in the query, but I mean like in the story to be able to progress the next part. Would you use like an append command?
Beautiful. If you have a backpack in your story, right, you could represent it with a list, right? It starts off empty. There's nothing in your backpack. The list is empty. And then you choose option 2, and you get some gold, right? Or you find the sword of Gizmara, and then you're like, okay, put it in the thing. Yes, you could say backpack.append and put in a string that represents that thing.
Okay.
That's a great connection to the milestone. A list or a dict could show up in your milestone, in your final project. It doesn't have to. You could build a final project that is very text heavy, and there's no like stamina or hit points or collecting things. It just kind of depends on your ambitions. Okay. All right. Well, let's do one more. Okay. There's not a big list here. Just to practice using methods. What do you want to do?
Does it have to be from this one?
This list here. We got a bunch of methods. We got a list called Ben's list. We're just practicing, or you're watching me practice, like, interacting with the data type and the methods available to the data type, and then going in and playing with it. Well, how would this work? Bart, do you want to pick one? There's nothing on your screen. Right here. Got a big list of methods. Index. Okay, what does index do? Returns the index of the first element with the specified value. Ooh, interesting. All right. So Ben's list dot index. All right, what value are we looking for? What number? 6. Close it up. All right. Does this answer make sense? Based on what the method said it would do. It returns the index of the first value that matches what we're looking for. So you have this argument inside an index in the parentheses 6. We're looking in Ben's list for 6. Do we find it?
Yeah.
And what position is it? The 3rd position, which means it's index number 2. So yes, this makes sense. You might ask yourself, what happens if I look for something that's not there? Oh, we get a value error. So we would want to be a little bit careful in using index to make sure that that thing is really there, or that we have some kind of way to handle that. We don't want errors to come up as we're processing things. Okay, cool. Lists. And let's just quickly shift over to Dicts. I know I did a very brief thing about Dicts that showed up in let's get back here, collection here. Yes, this is it. Authors, right? Okay. Sure. Okay, let me zoom back in here. Okay, Dict is short for dictionary. And a dictionary is a more complicated data type, but it's got some similarities to a list in the sense that it's basically comma separated values as long as you want, as many things as you want. What's interesting about the dictionary is that the indices are not 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. They are whatever I want them to be. Okay, so for instance, a phone book, well, I know that's very old fashioned, but a phone book is like a dictionary. You have a name and then you have an associated phone number with that name, right? And so a dictionary has a lot of application in coding and in programming. And for instance, in your project, you might consider having some things that you're tracking as the person goes through this. Gold, right? I might have a gold index that's attached to a value. Maybe somebody starts off with 100 gold, and as they go through, we can add or subtract to that value. It wouldn't be worth doing that unless I had also other things. Maybe I've got gold and stamina, right? So I could say character equals, and then I could say one of the indexes I'm tracking is gold. I'll say you're starting with 50. And then another thing I'm tracking is hit points, and I'm starting with 100. Keep my game simple, right? So then if I'm interested to know where do I stand with my character's gold, I could say character bracket gold. So remember back with the list, what we put inside the brackets to get to a specific value is the index, but the index is the indices, which is numbers 0, 1, 2, 3. Here, the index is a word. And so it returns the value, which is the thing on the right side of the colon. And that's a way that we can sort of look at a more complicated set of attributes for my character. Only the hit points, I say character bracket hit points. Notice that character bracket HP does not work. Why is that not the same as the line above it?
Because HP is a variable.
Good. Is that what you're going to say? The quotations, right? The quotations here indicate this is a string. No quotations here means this is a variable, and Python should find a variable called HP, right? So then if I wanted to make changes to character, I could do things like, hey, I want the character bracket gold to be plus equals 200. Ready to run. Good thing I'm working here, not ideally, because I can press up. Okay, let's see what happens. I'm going to type a character. So what is the plus equals operator doing? It's basically rolling into one symbol, two things. I'm assigning the value of gold a new value, and I'm adding 200 to the pre-existing value. So here's the longer way to write it. It equals 200 plus character gold. So now it should be at 450. Right. So this is the longhand version for this. And I saw some people using this in their looping and grading. Cool. And some people got rid of the looping altogether. You're like, there's a different way to do it, which is true. Okay, so lists and dictionaries, dicts, are two very useful structures that you may encounter that you will encounter definitely in your journey in Python or in any language. Okay. And we can look at one of the things that came up that I was a little unprepared for was this items method, which can be called on dictionaries. And basically what items produces is kind of like a list of what are called tuples, which are these things in parentheses. And so there's a way to kind of iterate through the dict items and see each pair of things. There's also a method called values, which will give me just an array of similar, but sort of like a list, an array of the values in the thing. And there's also keys, I think. Yeah. Now let's talk looping, because looping is really at the heart of your lab work today. And you saw looping happening in a couple of places here. We did it here. And we also did it in grading, or there was the intention to set it up. So let's talk about this situation for grade in grades. So first of all, what is grades in this situation?
Grades of the exams.
What's the data type? Let's be technical. You can see it defined 2 lines above. And what symbols are we using to define grades?
Numbers.
What's the symbols after the equal sign? So grades on line 25, grades equals, we're assigning a value to the variable grades. What's the first symbol you see? The square bracket. And the square bracket tells me we're working with what data type?
Integers.
Nope. First one we talked about today. List. And that's very common for any language where you see I'm declaring something and I'm using square brackets. This is a list or an array in another language. The fact that these variables are integers is important, but not in terms of defining what grades is. Grades is a list. What is it a list of? It's a list of integers. And that has to do, again, with the code above it, where we turn the input, which is always a string, into an integer. And this is going to be important in your project because when you ask the person what they want to do, you're not going to take probably a word response. You're going to have options listed with numbers. Option 1, do this. Option 2, do this. Option 3, do this. And then they're going to type something, but you're going to take the string and turn it into an integer, and then you're going to do something. Okay. So back to this. So grades is a list. So this construct for grade in grades will basically go through the list one element at a time and look at each element. Okay, so back to Ben's list. I think doesn't exist in memory anymore because I started in terminal. So let's just make it again 2, 3, 5, 8, 10. All right. So we could create a loop, very basic loop for this is called the looping variable. So I can call it whatever I want. Give me a variable. Give me a name of a variable. Number. Okay. For number in Ben's list. What comes after this? What symbol do we need to show this is the end of my for statement? Same as we use with if and elif. Colon. When I press enter, this ideally is not giving me my default spacing, so I need to go in at least 4 or 5 times. All right, so the most basic thing I could do just is like print out the number, right? So let's just print number. Okay, right, boom. So here's a loop where I'm going through Ben's list and I'm just printing out each number, right? Let's do a little bit of math. So let's do the same looping, but this time let's print out 5 times the square of the number. What do I need to type?
5
5
times
times 2. I want to print out 5 times the square of each number.
You could do print.
Okay, good. But let's back up. Before we type prints, we need something else.
Indent.
Yeah, you need it there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, print. Because I said we want to print these out. All right.
Number. Asterisk.
Times
2.
2. 5 times the square of the number.
Or number times number.
Times number would give me the number squared. And what?
Asterisk 5.
5 times that. Okay. All right. Those look like really big numbers. 2 squared is 4. 4 times 5 is 20. Okay, I don't feel like we're in the right place. Okay. What if I wanted to print out something totally unrelated? Print right there. I mean, is this going to work? First of all, do I have to use the looping variable? What do you think?
Wouldn't you need to do integer input? INT input.
Question is just, is this going to work? No. Right, it's fine. So how many times did it print high there? Why? Why 4 times?
Or
Because there's 4 elements in the list. So what's happening in the loop is we're going through each element one at a time, and I can use that element or not. Doesn't matter. I'm just really creating a loop that goes 4 times. Okay. So for instance, going back to your project, you have a situation where you walk into the bar and you got 3 options. Maybe you set up your options as check the bathroom and buy a drink and
talk to barmaid.
punch bartender. Okay. It's spicy here. All right. So how could I create a printed list of the things that I have to choose from? Well, let's start it up. What's the first word we need?
Options.
Now, we're going to loop through this list for 4. Looping variable, get to the side. I always use a representation of what the elements are. What are the elements in my list? Right, and what are those? Options. Options, I could say string, right? Options, I think is good. It's very descriptive. Now, the thing I don't like about using options here is I've already declared a variable options. And so we want, first of all, we want to use singular, not plural, because each one of them is an option, not options, right? So a construct that's very common is this. And that's what happened in the grading one, is we said for grade in grades, right? So we have this pluralized list. And then we say for the singular, now we've created a new variable called option. It's a looping variable. Okay. So if I just said print option, I'm making progress. Right? But I might want to get a number involved to show what the option number is, because then I can say, well, 1 check bathroom, 2 buy a drink, right? Let's see if there's a way to get the index along with the actual element. Sounds like a question. Looping Python, get index with element. Slightly more complicated version here. Let's check it out. For index, comma, element in enumerate options. And then I'm going to do, we've worked on this before in various ways, but I'm just going to concatenate the things, which is I want to print index plus option, sorry, element. What is it telling me?
Unsupported operand types for plus.
Yeah.
Integer and string.
Can't add an integer to a string. What is the implication for this line of code? There's the plus sign, so that makes sense. Which one is an integer? Which one is a string? Well, element represents the options, which are a bunch of strings, right? So what is index? It's going to be an integer because the integers for the indices for a list are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this way of doing it isn't going to work. Now, a lot of you discovered the F string. So let's try that. 1, 2, 3, 4, print F. And I think that this is actually what this was showing here, F. And the interpolation then becomes just putting the variable name in the curly brackets. So I want the number index with the period, and then I want the element. Aha, better. Not quite the numbers I would choose, but we're making progress. Right? So I'm printing out my options to say, okay, option 0, check the bathroom. Option 1, buy a drink. Option 2, punch the bartender. And if I wanted to make it one bigger than what it is, any ideas? I don't know what you want. What do I need to do to index? Do I want 0, 1, 2? Or do I want
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3? So I want it to be one bigger than what it is. How do I make something one bigger?
Plus 1.
Plus 1. Anything inside the curly braces is going to be evaluated as code. So index is an integer, index plus 1 is 1 bigger than whatever the index is. Now we're talking. Got 3 options. I'm looping. Life is good. Okay. 2 o'clock, let's do some lab work. I do want to take some time to make sure people have a chance to start their flow charts and ask me questions about things. I'll have more to say about some asynchronous support for that. If you have it, of course, if you've got your evaluations, let me know. I want to make sure I get everybody's evaluation before we walk out of here. You've got 3 tasks and 2 challenge tasks in the lab assignment. Okay.
Yeah, just break down like team name, name,
Sure.
Sebastian. Here's. Yeah.
So, good. Finish that thing?
Yes.
Okay. You just this. Once you circle over, it's only the passage right here. Is it here or is it like this? This is. Yes, yeah, that's circle perfect. Change your work from it. So, this, yeah, all done. So circle right here, because you're doing, oh, yeah. Adrian, finish. That was the back. Yes, it's very confusing. But if you go to Sebastian C A, I think that is. This E.
What's the website called that we use for flow charts?
Draw that. I'll put a link in. To the left. Video section. One like this. So I did like so. Yeah. Put a link in the 5 activities and assignments. Questions? You want to get rid of it?
Yeah. But I didn't have it ready.
Oh, you want. Right. So I think in their settings, you go all the way to the bottom, there's something called danger zone. Then you jump.
I can make another one with the same name.
Once you clear it, should be fine.
Yeah, this one, I don't.
That's where they love M5 left. So actually, tell you to do this in the range stuff for us, just give us the numbers. Which maybe do that. Since this is producing a random list of numbers every time, you actually have to get a random list of numbers from there without working.